Hopefully, by now, the live stream has started. And I just want to welcome everyone, say hi. Welcome to the kickoff event for NEA Big Read Toms River 2021. We are so excited that all of you could join us today. My name is Mike Kenny, and I'm the grant writer and communications coordinator for Toms River Regional Schools. And I am joined today by the district's intermediate supervisor, Leslie Port, and our guest of honor, Rachel Ignotofsky. A little bit about NEA Big Read for those who don't know. This is a national literacy campaign hosted by the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. Every year, only about 75 organizations throughout the country are awarded an NEA Big Read grant. And this is our district's 4th year doing this. As a matter of fact, Toms River Regional Schools was the first public school district to ever be awarded NEA Big Read back in 2017, and we are super proud of that. Through Big Read, an entire community reads one book over the course of about a month. This year, our selection is An American Sunrise by author and U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, who will be visiting Toms River on May 27th. But even though NEA Big Read centers on one book, it's really all about reading and exploring. And as such, it invites other authors and artists to be an active part of the program. In fact, it strongly encourages that. And because her books so beautifully honor this year's themes of womanhood, identity, nature, and so much more, we are absolutely thrilled to have a New York Times best-selling author such as Rachel with us today. And the fact that she's here to speak to us during Women's History Month makes it even all the more better and perfect. And with that, I'm going to kick it to the person who's responsible for getting Rachel here today, and that's Leslie Port. Leslie?
Hi, thank you, everybody. Welcome to our presentation of Rachel. Rachel is originally from New Jersey, and she might be able to speak a little bit about that. From less than an hour from us, and she's an accomplished artist and great with science, and I'm thrilled to have her here. I saw her book a year ago and bought it for my just now 6-year-old granddaughter because I did not want to forget about this book and have it for her as she grows up to maybe be a woman in science. And Rachel also has other books, in case you weren't sure. She has some books about women in art and women in sports. And that's just one area that she's focused on. And I know she'll be sharing a lot of her information. So I would love to introduce all of you right now to Rachel Ignotofsky, our guest speaker.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about my book, Women in Science. And of course, we're also going to be mentioning the other books in the series, Women in Sports and Women in Art. So without further ado, I am going to start sharing my screen and presenting my book talk with you all. So just give me 1 second and we will do that right now. So, as you can see, hi everyone, I'm Rachel Ignotofsky, and I'm the author and illustrator of all of these books right here. And I write about history and science. But before I get into that, I actually have a little secret that I want to share with you. When I was a kid, I hated reading. I know I'm not supposed to be saying this, especially during your special reading month, but it would actually be books that would help me with that. So this is an image of me when I was in elementary school. And as you can see, I know I look like a gremlin before it gets wet. It was rough, but I was a little artist. I was always making stuff and I felt really confident in expressing myself creatively. What I wasn't confident in was reading. I had exotropia, which is a really fancy way of saying I had a lazy eye. And every time I opened a book, I would get a huge migraine headache. On top of that, I wasn't reading at the level that my teachers were expecting of me at that age. So I was tested multiple times for dyslexia and other reading disorders. I did not have a learning disorder. I just wasn't connecting with the material in the way my teachers expected me to. But then I found comics and cartoons, heavily illustrated books about science and history that made me feel excited when I was reading them. And all of a sudden, I started learning about these really complicated topics. I started reading Shakespeare. I started learning about chemistry, biology, anything I wanted to, but all with these really heavily illustrated books. And for me, this was like a huge moment as a little kid. I saw myself as smart for the first time in my young life. And I realized that I could learn anything, no matter how complicated, as long as I approached it in my own way. So now, as an adult and a professional artist, I create the kind of art and books that helped me so much when I was a kid. I create art about science, about history, about topics that I think are important and interesting that can help teachers teach in their classroom. And something really interesting happens when you take the time to organize dense and complicated information and you spend that extra time to then make it pretty. You can make people stop because they think something looks cool. And then all of a sudden they start reading, they start spending time with the image, and they're tricked into learning. And that's what we have to keep doing. We have to keep tricking people into learning, because it's only when you understand the science and the history behind how our world works can we hope to make informed decisions. So all of this led me to create my very first book, Women in Science, 50 Fearless Pioneers Who Changed the World. So there was a lot of reasons why I created this book, and it goes all the way back to ancient Alexandria, where we talk about the first ever recorded female mathematician, Hypatia. And then it goes all the way forward to modern day, where we talk about Iranian mathematician Miriam Mizrakhani, who's the first woman ever to win a Fields Medal, which is kind of like the Nobel Prize in math. And trust me, I know those were two mathematicians, but we talk about a lot more than math. We talk about chemistry, biology. We talk about women who have dived to the deepest parts of our oceans and have even explored outer space. But what's interesting is that we don't just learn about a lot of different topics in science. Because we're moving through history, we get to learn about history through the lens of these women's stories. So we talk about suffrage, the civil rights movement, women's roles during World War II and the space race. And through their stories, we get to experience their lives. So as you can see, there was a lot of reasons why I made this book. But one of the main reasons was actually Marie Curie. So give me a little wave to the camera if you know who Marie Curie is. I see you guys all out there. Marie Curie was the first woman I thought of when I started creating a poster series about women in science, which is how this book started. And she's probably the first woman that you learned about when you were just kind of learning about science history. She may be the only woman that you learned about. And why is that? Well, she has the BBC special, the PBS documentary. And when we talk about scientific history, we have our Einsteins and our Teslas. And then they also include Marie Curie, and everybody pats themselves on the back and they go, look how inclusive we're being. Look, there's a girl in the room. But this is actually not what inclusion looks like. This is what it looks like to have a room full of men and one exceptional woman. And it's not the way history actually happened. And it creates this expectation that there should only be a few women in a room full of men. In reality, and as I was researching this book, I was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of women who have contributed just as much as Einstein and Tesla. And when I was writing this back in 2015, I was upset when I learned about all these women a little bit. I was upset that I hadn't known about them before. I thought, why wasn't I taught about them in school when I was a kid? How come there was no BBC or PBS special about these awesome ladies? But that's what we're here to change. And we're going to change that by telling their stories. And I'm actually going to share a couple stories from my books with you here today about very different women who come from very different parts of history and places and studied very different topics. But the one thing they had in common was that no matter what challenges or roadblocks they faced, whether it was racism, sexism, classism, being told that their work, like that they shouldn't be working because they're a woman, or that their work shouldn't be funded because they were a woman, not being taken seriously. Despite all of that, they continued to pursue their passion of science, and through their discoveries, they have changed our world. So I'm going to start off by talking about Mary Anning, who some refer to as one of the first ever paleontologists. So Mary Anning was a very poor woman living in England. And as a poor woman in England, that meant that, one, she did not have access to a formal education. She was not allowed to be educated formally. And two, when she eventually made her discoveries, because she was a woman, she was not allowed to be published. So to help feed her family as a teenager, Mary Anning would climb on these dangerous cliffs near her house, and she would collect what we now know are fossils. But at the time, the tourists that would visit and purchase these fossils from her, these noblemen and gentlemen, they thought they were mystical oddities. They would call these rocks snake stones and devil's toenails. But Mary Anning understood that they were something else, and she wanted to know more about them. She began drawing diagrams of them, taking copious notes on them, and she even started figuring out how they fit together. And through her work and her discoveries of these fossils, she discovered the first full fossils of dinosaurs ever in the area, the Ichthyosaurus and the Paleosaurus. Now, this is huge. At the time, the scientific community didn't even know that extinction was a thing. They thought every single animal that you see on this earth has been there exactly the way it is since the dawn of time. They didn't understand evolution, and they didn't think that there could even be an age of the reptiles or the dinosaurs. But Mary Anning's findings changed all of this because it showed a skeleton of an animal that never existed before. So scientists, the same noblemen who used to buy her trinkets from her, they all flocked to her work because they realized how important they were. They took her fossils and they published her findings without her. Like I said before, she was poor and she was a woman. Even if she could get her name out there, no one would believe it was her. And it's really not until historians have found her journals and letters written back and forth between her and the people who stole her work, her actually commenting that they were labeling things wrong, that we found out that she was actually the one who started this field of science. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell the history the way it actually happened, include the people who actually made it happen, and we can right that wrong of her story being forgotten. That leads me to talk about another woman who had to face a lot of challenges also and deal with a lot of sexism in her field. Lise Meitner. So Lise Meitner began working in Germany when it was illegal for women to be in university. But she was so smart that the universities in Berlin wanted her to do research anyway. So she began her career doing dangerous radiochemistry experiments alone in an unventilated basement. She wasn't even allowed to use the bathrooms at the university. They made her go across the street and use the bathrooms in the restaurant that was across the street because they were like, we don't want to see you in the main building. It's scandalous. You're a lady. It really wasn't until the Prussian government allowed women to enter university that Lise Meitner could really start her career. And oh boy, how she started it. She began working with her lab partner, Otto Hahn, and they began discovering new elements. At the time, the periodic table was not filled up yet, and there were still elements to be discovered. Fast forward, and she's actually working with Otto Hahn in a race with other scientists to create a new element. And they're doing that. They're trying to create a new element by changing the atomic mass of an atom. And they do that by trying to smash neutrons into the center of the nucleus of uranium. So they're smashing neutrons into uranium. And every time the results are wonky and it just doesn't make any sense, they have no idea what it means. They're actually on the brink of one of the most important discoveries of all time. But it is in the late 1930s. They're in Germany. Hitler rises to power, and he begins persecuting the Jewish people in Germany and begins the Holocaust. Lisa is Jewish. She has to leave her home, leave her life, and leave her work because her life was in danger. And she becomes a refugee in Sweden. She was heartbroken, and she didn't want to leave her work behind. So she continues to work on the problem. What did it mean? What did it mean, the results they were getting from smashing neutrons into uranium? And she writes secret letters to Otto Hahn at the risk of her own life. So it's actually while she's on a ski lift, she realizes, she was just thinking about this problem all the time. She realizes they weren't creating a new atom. They were stretching apart the nucleus of an atom. She described it like stretching apart pizza dough. And they were actually creating more energy than the energy that went into the experiment. She realized that they were creating nuclear energy, that they discovered fission. This is huge. She writes back to Otto Hahn. He publishes, and he is then awarded the Nobel Prize without her. She's a woman, and she cannot return to Germany, and she is not given the rightful credit that is due to her for the work that she has done on this project. Sure, members in the community know her relationship with Otto Hahn and know that they were lab partners, but she's really not given full credit or the Nobel Prize money. Again, we're here to right that wrong. So when you think of nuclear energy, when you think of fission, you also think of the amazing scientist, Lisa Meitner. And lastly, in talking about the book Woman in Science, that leads me to talk about one of my favorite stories, Katherine Johnson. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have watched the movie Hidden Figures. I was actually living in Kansas City at the time when it came out, and it was really exciting because I went at like a midnight screening of Hidden Figures, and there was all these like teenage girls also there. And every time one of the scientists, like Katherine Johnson, did something or accomplished something on screen, they would all erupt in cheers and start clapping. We were all just applauding these women the entire film, and it was just this really wonderful experience. So for those who haven't seen it, I'm about to spoil the whole movie. And for those who have seen the movie, I'm going to tell you maybe some things that you didn't know about Katherine Johnson. So Katherine Johnson was working at NASA during segregation in the United States. And segregation is, it is one of the greatest shames. It's a part of one of the greatest shames in our country. It is the legacy of slavery. It is a legacy that we're still trying to fight against today. And it meant that she wasn't allowed in certain parts of the building at NASA. And she was, how do you say, a human computer. And a human computer computers back then were very new. And the term computer didn't really refer to machines as much as they referred to rooms filled with women, usually women, doing smaller sets of math equations to solve a more complicated math problem. So Katherine Johnson was a math genius, and she was working as a computer, which is kind of like a little on par with secretarial work, and that was not enough for her. So this actually wasn't in the movie. This I found out by watching an interview with her. She goes to her supervisor and she asks, is it illegal for me to be in the room where they're talking about the space race, where they're talking about the Mercury mission? Because during that time, it was the Cold War, and we were in a race with Russia to get the first American in space and then the first American on the moon. And he went, no, it's not illegal. And asking whether or not it was legal was the kind of questions you had to ask when it was illegal for your body to be present in so many places in America. And she goes, well, if it's not against the law, I'm going in. So she goes into the meeting. She begins showing off her math skills, and she impresses everyone in that room. Because of that, she is tasked with calculating the flight window for the Mercury mission, the first manned mission the Americans did in space. As you know from the movie, that was a huge success. Because she did such a great job, she was then made and promoted to be the lead in calculating the flight path for the Apollo mission, getting the first men on the moon. She went on to have a respected and amazing career at NASA. When they finally got real computers, they checked it against her math to make sure that the mechanical computers were working correctly. She helped to write one of the first textbooks on space. She worked on the space shuttle project, and she retired incredibly respected, a job well done. All of that alone, she made, of course I'm writing about her in my book. I'm actually, as I was creating this book, I was struggling to get it out on time, and I'm drawing all these pictures as quickly as possible. And my editor emails me, and she goes, "You got to check the news." In 2015, Katherine Johnson is awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Barack Obama, and I quickly draw it in right before it goes to the printers. It's just amazing to think how far we have come. She went from not being allowed in the room to getting one of the highest civilian honors you can get in this country. And it shows how far we have come. And also, now that this movie is out about her, it can begin to make her a household name as well. The problem, though, is that we still have a lot of work to do. This is a graph from the last decade's census. It was published in 2013, and it shows the percentage of women in STEM fields and since the 1970s to 2011. And we're actually about to, in the next couple of years, we're going to see how we did during this census. The census is done every 10 years. Let's see how much progress we've made. And so you can see things have been getting better, but there's still so much work that needs to be done. I just want to point out only the 13% percentage of women are engineers. That number is ending lower than where most of these numbers have started. So what do we need to do to fix this? Well, we need to create policies that support women. We need to create pipelines to talent and recognize talent in places that previously the science community hasn't already looked at. But also, we need to make sure that we break down harmful stereotypes by telling scientific history the way it actually happened. And we need to make sure that all of these women become household names. So how do we do that? Well, it's about creating accessible materials. And I've mentioned a couple accessible materials in this talk. Hidden Figures, the movie, that is an accessible material. The BBC documentary that I watched as a kid about Marie Curie. Books and comics like the ones that helped me learn when I was a kid. And it's our job as artists, as teachers, as storytellers to make sure that we depict history accurately. And why is that? Well, it's because art is more than just pretty. It has the power to reach a whole new audience. And I touched upon this earlier before. And how does it do that? Because it tells a story instantaneously without words. That's what art can do. And don't just take my word for it. Some of the most powerful institutions in the world pay artists like me a fortune to tell their story. And by doing so, they get to set the tone of what is good, what is bad, and what is normal. But what happens when we take that power back? Well, we can tell history the way it actually happened. And that means telling an inclusive history, telling the stories of marginalized people who stories have been previously left out. And that means people of color, members of the LGBTQ community, women, people with disabilities, the list goes on. And we just have to do our part to make sure that we include them and we don't continue to leave them out. So I started this project back in 2015, and here are actually some of my sketchbook drawings that would be turned into the illustrations that you see in the book. And the project started because I was hanging out with my friends who are all teachers. And I went to what I like to call a teacher party. Teachers party too. I'm telling your secrets, teachers. And at this party, I was complaining. I just read that the 2013 census showing that graph. I was reading about how more women were graduating with STEM degrees, but for some reason, they were not getting accepted into jobs that they were rightfully experienced for. And I was incensed. And so I'm complaining to all my teacher friends, and I'm like, you know, the problem starts all the way back in school. We're not taught about these women in classes. We're not taught about women in like history class. We should be learning about them in science class, math class, gym class. I was just livid. And they were like, Rachel, calm down. It's the weekend. Chill out. And I realized in talking to them that I should be creating the materials that they could use, that I, as an artist and an author, had the power to make the book that I wish existed in the world, so that they could easily teach these topics in class. So I began drawing. And I published this book, and I'm just so happy to say it has been a huge success. This book has been translated into over 25 different languages. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 94 weeks, and it is now being used in classes all over the world. And these kids are growing up with a very different experience than I have. I mean, just the fact that I'm here talking about this book with you is a very different experience than I had growing up. And because of the success of this book, I have been so honored that I've been able to continue the series. And the next book I did was Women in Sports, 50 Fearless Athletes Who Played to Win. And the reason I chose sports as the next thing in the book, the next book in the series, was because when I think about stereotypes that women face, the one that rings in my head the most is, oh, our bodies are just inherently weak. And that wrongful stereotype that we are weak has been an excuse throughout history to leave women out of education, out of leadership roles, out of government. So what better way than telling true stories about women who have broken records, who have bench pressed over 300 pounds, and even women who have climbed Everest. And I'm just going to share this quick story here with you about Junko Tabai. Junko Tabai grew up in a time in Japan where gender roles were very, very strict. But she loved mountain climbing. She saw it as a way to work together with other people to accomplish a goal. And she was determined in the 1960s to be the first woman to climb Mount Everest. And she actually wanted to take an all-female team with her. As she was climbing Mount Everest it's hard and it's expensive. You need to be sponsored to be able to do it, or you have to be independently wealthy. And as she was looking for sponsorships, she was told by numerous people that she was a bad wife, a bad woman, irresponsible. How dare she dream so big? But she kept pursuing her dream. And eventually she found a sponsor. And in 1970, she led an all-female team up to Everest. And she became the 36th person ever. There wasn't that many people to climb Everest back then to make it to the top. They even got buried by a snowstorm at one point, and she had to dig her way out. She had to climb upside down on these crazy icy caverns. And in doing that, she was able to change the perception of what women were able to do in Japan. She became a celebrity. She began touring the country, talking about women's rights. She created a organization to help clean Mount Everest and make sure that the ecosystem wasn't getting disrupted by climbers. And her story is just one example of the many women in my book, Women in Sports, who take their platform once they gain celebrity and use it for social good and social change to fight against sexism and often also racism as well. That leads me to show off the next book in the series, Women in Art, 50 Fearless Creatives Who Inspired the World. And of course I was going to do a Women in Art book. Being an artist myself, I've already ranted and raved about the power that art has and how important it is when diverse groups of people use their power to tell their story. And I would like to share just one more story with you. This is the last one, the special friendship that exists between Lola Alvarez and famous Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. So you all probably already know who Frida Kahlo is. She is probably one of the most famous female artists of all time. Mexican painter, did a lot of self-portraits, celebrated both her native indigenous culture and her Mexican identity through her artwork, but not many people know who Lola Alvarez is. Lola Alvarez was pretty much the first female Mexican photographer. And she was taught photography by her husband. And when they got divorced, she needed to provide for both her and her child. And so she did that with her camera. And she got a job working for a local Mexican magazine, and she did everything. She would photograph orphanages, fire stations, things, happenings on the street, like photojournalism. And she said that she actually got made fun of a lot because she was the only woman out on the street with her camera. And to quote her, she said, "That's why I learned to become a fighter." She did everything. She did fashion, she did high-end gallery work, and she was so successful that she opened her own gallery where she got to feature other female artists like Frida Kahlo. Now, Frida Kahlo is really famous now, but back when she was practicing art, although she got a lot of international recognition, in her home country of Mexico, not so much. She was seen more as another famous artist, Diego Rivera. She was seen as just his wife. And she actually never had a show in Mexico until Lola Alvarez gave her her first and only show in Mexico City. Frida Kahlo's health was declining a lot at that time, and this is the last show she was able to do before she passed away. And it is this very important moment in art history where she decorates her bed in pictures of all of these people that she admires and other artists and heroes of her. And she lays in the center of her gallery, and she finally gets to have her lifelong dream of a solo show in Mexico City. So it's just this wonderful story of women helping women. And also the photographs that you see of Frida Kahlo, all these famous photographs of her, they were all taken by Lola Alvarez. So Lola Alvarez is really to thank for preserving the history and the memory of Frida Kahlo. I know I just talked a lot about women's history, but real quick, I just want to mention Earth Day is coming up next year. And I just want to mention that I wrote a book all about planet Earth because I think climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we all face as human people. But the first thing you need to do before we begin solving climate change is explain to everyone the basic fundamentals of ecology, why climate change is happening, and people need to understand how our world works. And by doing that, I wrote a book to be a tool to help teach those topics in classrooms. So we profile different ecosystems from all over the world. We talk about their biggest benefits and also the greatest threat that they face. And that way we can learn more cool things about our planet, but also learn how to properly protect it. And I also provide a lot of resources for being able to protect our planet. And here's just another image from the book where we talk about how we can better work together. Bringing it back to women's history, I am so honored that my book is part of a larger movement to get women's stories out there. And here are just a few of the books and movies that I highly suggest that you check out if you haven't, especially the book Headstrong by Rachel Swaby and Nobel Prize Women in Science by Sharon McGranie. I believe I said her name correctly. Please check those books out. They're very, very good. That leads me to kind of end this talk with a sentiment. Our world faces tremendous problems. Women make up 50% of our world's population. That is brain power that we cannot afford to ignore. I hope my book provides some insight into these women's lives and also real life role models for all kids to be inspired to pursue their own passions and dreams. Thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited to answer all of your questions that we're going to be going through after this. And again, happy Women's Month. Ooh. Here we are.
Okay, so thank you so much, Rachel, for the presentation. I'm so happy that you spoke about Hidden Figures and Katherine Johnson because our 7th graders viewed that film and talked about her.
Wonderful movie.
Yeah, and the teachers have the Women in Science book and the Planet Earth book, so they have resources to use for Earth Day, and that's great. I loved it. I loved your talk, and I have a lot of questions from multiple students, and
Lay it on me.
I've combined some because a lot of them had the same concerns. Going right back to your childhood, one wanted to know if it was difficult for you to write or color with a lazy eye and if you ever had it fixed.
That is a great question. So, okay, so I started physical therapy for my eye as early as, I mean, longer than I can remember. I had glasses when I was in preschool, these big, thick Coke bottle glasses. And my mom did a ton of research about whether or not I needed surgery or not. And at the time, surgery for a lazy eye was only like, there was a 1 in 4 chance that it could go even worse. So I began physical therapy, which meant for 8 years, I would spend about a half an hour to an hour doing these exercises that also gave me a huge headache, but I strengthened that eye up. Strong as bull, this eye is. So now it's completely fixed. Drawing was never a problem. I was always drawing. You know, the funny thing is that sometimes they tell you to block one eye out so you could really see what you're looking at without depth perception. So drawing was never a problem for me. I was always making something. But reading was really hard because of the headaches. But having so much illustration in the books that I was drawn to allowed me to have places to rest. It also allowed me to kind of like choose my own adventure. Like, I'm reading this part of the page, now I'm reading this part of the page, instead of this big block of text. And by third grade, I got back on to a basic reading level, and now you can't stop me. I read like a speed demon. So just goes to show you.
Okay, so one of the other questions was, did you have a favorite book while you were growing up, and who was your idol or role model while you were growing up?
I had a couple favorite books when I was growing up. The Amelia's Notebook series was a huge, I loved those books because they were so cute, because they had Amelia, the fictional character in it, draw all these things in her notebook on the side, which I thought was so cool. And I remembered that, which is why there's so many illustrations in the borders of my books now. Another really great series it's by Michael Vasquez. It's called World Famous Artists, and they're these biography books about art history. So I would read about Mary Cassatt, Frida Kahlo, Goya, Vincent van Gogh growing up. So I just knew I always wanted to be an artist, and those artists were my role models.
Okay. One of the questions was, if you could go back to see yourself as a teen, did you ever imagine the success that you're having now?
That's a funny, that's an interesting question. And I'm just going to say this. Yeah, I did. I took myself very seriously when I was in high school. When I was 15, I remember going to my art teacher and my mom and saying, I'm going to art school. This is what I'm going to do with my life. I used my own money to pay for extra art classes. I took the train to Philadelphia. When I was 16, I took the train to Philadelphia every single day during my summer to take college courses at UArts to prep my portfolio. And then I did the whole portfolio review thing to get scholarship for school. It's like an athletic scholarship almost, getting into art school. I knew there's something in me that knew that that this was my path, and I knew I wanted to do books, and I obsessively worked as hard as I could on it since I was 15. So no, and I think it's good to believe in yourself. If there's something that you're really, really passionate about and you want, take yourself seriously. I don't think people take teenagers seriously enough.
That I would agree with that. One of my questions for you is, were you a doodler? When you mentioned the margins of the books. I was wondering, because the swirling patterns on your pages kind of lead you from this part of the page to that part of the page. So I was wondering if you were a doodler.
Oh my God, my tests were just covered in doodles. Sometimes my teachers would grade my doodles. Beyond, I couldn't take notes without drawing. And even to this day, I'm always multitasking. I think doodling is a sign of being really good at multitasking. I'm always listening to a podcast while I'm drawing, or listening to music while I'm writing. So I think it's really good to stimulate both sides of the brain while learning. So doodle away, kids.
Okay. So another question was, how do you best do your work? Is there a special time or place that you work in?
So that's actually a really great question. So
really great questions. I have to
these are fantastic. I'm starting every sentence by saying, that's a great question. I'm just complimenting everyone. Okay, so when it comes to drawing, like I said, I've been drawing ever since infancy. And I've been drawing I count being paid for something when you become a professional. So the first time I was paid to create artwork as a commission, I was 18. So I've been doing this professionally since I was 18, freelancing since I was 18 while I was in school. I could draw whenever. I could be sick, I could have a bad day, I could be sad. I'm drawing, I can get it done. Professionalism. When it comes to writing, however, that is something that is still very hard to do, and I have to really make sure I do it during my optimal time. And everybody's different, so it's about learning who you are to be able to work at your best level. So for me, I know that between the hours of 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. are my writing time. If it doesn't happen then, it's not going to happen that day at all. And I have to bribe myself with snacks. So I'm like, if I get this done, I get a muffin. Like, it's a whole thing. But it takes the commitment of whether or not you want to do it. For me, when I decided that I was going to become a writer professionally, it was when I was offered the book deal for Women in Science. I just was like, I'm going to write 500 words a day, and I'm just going to do it until it's right. And I stuck to the plan, and that's what I did. And sometimes you just kind of have to brute force these kinds of creative projects.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions about the books and any obstacles, because the women that you write about faced obstacles in their career world. And some of the students wanted to know, did you have any obstacles, or did you have any occasion where people stood in your way and said, oh, you shouldn't do that? It sounded like from your group of friends that they encouraged you. But did you face any obstacles?
The thing is that the people who doubted me and the people who may have, that were unkind to me in my career never were my bosses. They were always people who, or like, the sexism that I have experienced, or like even like the kind of like inappropriate things I've experienced, they've always been at the same level career-wise as me, never my boss. So I've been very, very lucky in that sense. And my attitude is, if they don't pay your bills, pay them no mind. If they're not inspiring you, and if they're not paying you, they're none of your business. So I just ignored them. I just kind of brushed them off, and I just continued to focus on my work. And for me, the publishing aspect of my career has been nothing but wonderful. I put these images out there on my website and on my online shop, and I knew that they were going to be a book. So I prepared a pitch for them, and I was going to pitch 2 publishers, but they came to me first. Multiple publishers came wanting to do this book with me, and with my agent, we facilitated a bidding war and created a multi-book deal. And since then, it's just been books, books, books. So, and I am lucky enough to work with a team of fabulous women who have the same ideals and aspirations as I do to get these women's stories out there. So it's been fantastic.
That is fantastic. I have a question about the women then, because you showed that picture with so many women, and some of the questions were about whether or not you got to meet any of the women that are still alive as you were preparing, and if not, who, alive or dead, would you like to meet and chat with of any of the 3 books? Who would you want to meet?
So I didn't get to meet in person, but we have chatted because they reached out to me. I visited the Salk and got to speak at the Salk, which is a cancer research institute in San Diego. And I got to speak to, and I got a brief encounter with Elizabeth Blackwell, which is the woman who discovered telomeres. That's the caps on the end of DNA, and kind of explains, why does our hair turn gray? Why do we age? And her, fabulous, fabulous gray hair. It's all things like that, that kind of correlate with aging, telomeres. So I got to meet with her. And I also had to have a correspondence with Xiaolan Wu, the woman who discovered the Higgs boson, which is it's called the God particle, because it's the subatomic particle that kind of like gives everything mass. She reached out to me, and she sent me this email talking about how she's so happy that, because she also likes to draw, how happy she was that she was in the book. And then I printed out her a big poster of my drawing of her and mailed it to her at CERN in Switzerland. And it's now hanging up in CERN on this wall of all this artwork that's about the particle accelerator there. So that's been really, really cool and really exciting. If I could meet anyone in this book, I'm going to pick someone who's alive, so maybe it could happen. Sylvia Alice Earle, because I think her research in deep sea exploration is like, it's crazy. Take me on your submarine. I want to come.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun, actually. Whose story inspired you the most?
Oh man, I think they all inspired me, but I would say Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, and the thing about Silent Spring is that through her writing and her prose, she was able to get the general public aware of a science issue, which was the pollution in the groundwater being caused by DDT. And through her work, she was able to sway public opinion and petition Congress to start the EPA. And the EPA is what we depend on now to keep our water and our air clean, so factories don't like pollute rivers, things like that. So it's that work of creating something that could be in the pop culture to then sway public opinion to then actually have an effect on policy and real change.
Okay, some of the students were getting inspired by you as an agent of change. And I had a question about, let's see, your books make you a potential role model for young girls. And how does that make you feel? And one of the boys wrote, how does a boy get to be inspired to support women around him?
Well, I think the first step, I'm going to answer the boy question first. I think the first step is allowing yourself to have female role models. Like when I grew up, I had both male and female role models. That is very, very normal for like someone to be like, oh, like if you are into skateboarding, you're like, I want to be like Tony Hawk, or like I want to be like Vincent van Gogh, and I also want to be like Georgia O'Keeffe. Like I want to be painters, you know, and be inspired by them. But for some reason, because the sexism is so bad in our culture, not enough young men think to themselves, I want to be like Jane Goodall. I want to go and research like chimpanzees in the wild, or I want to be like Rachel Carson. I want to write an award-winning book that changes the world, you know? And I just think, I think that's the first step to break down gender inequality. And then how do you support other women? Listen to them, just listen to them, listen to their like complaints and what their perspective. And also like, I think the biggest thing is women are just not one thing. We're multifaceted human beings. We're going to have multifaceted stories, and to understand that we're just complex people, just like men are. Men are allowed to be multiple things. Women are multiple things as well. And what was the first part of the question?
How does becoming a potential role model for girls make you feel?
Oh, I feel great. I feel wonderful. When I first wrote this book, I thought if this inspires one woman, like one young girl who was doubting herself to pursue her dream, whether it's in the sciences, the arts, or sports, if it motivates one girl to figure out what she wants to do with her life. Because I know how hard that is when you're young to figure out who you are and the kind of adult you want to shape yourself into. Because that's what you do. You're actively shaping the adult you're going to become all the time. I thought that if I could inspire one girl, then this would be a success. And it's just been overwhelming to hear about. I did a book talk, and an 8-year-old came up to me and was like, I want to be an astrophysicist, just like Jocelyn Bell Burnell. Like, that's what I want to do. And I was like, I didn't even know the word astrophysics when I was 8. And then she starts telling me all the books she's reading and the classes that she's taking. And it was just like, I'm so happy that I introduced you someone that could then open the door to further your learning and just express your full potential. It was wild.
That was great. That was great. Some of the kids wanted to know how long. How long were you working before you were all over social media? How long to write a book? And my thinking is they're not taking into account you have to research the women's stories. Then you have to write the stories that you want to include. Then you have to draw the pictures to accompany the writing. So how long did that whole process take for each of the books?
Well, for the books, it takes me as long as I'm given. So it's like I have deadlines. I'm usually given a year to do this, but this is all I do. This is my full-time job, and I'm lucky to be compensated in a way where I can make this my full-time job. A lot of authors and illustrators aren't so lucky. So I have about a year. I research everything. I write everything. I draw everything. It's a whole process. I don't get a lot of sleep. But you know how it is. It's like homework. It's like having a large essay project. You set deadlines for yourself. You manage your time. You have a lot of discipline. You get it done. The question about the timeline for my career, I'll break it down for you guys. I graduated in 2007 from West Windsor Plainsboro High School, which is right by you guys. I went to art school. I went to Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, which is part of Temple University. I chose that program because it had an incredibly strong graphic design program and an incredibly strong print media program, like books, like print design. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. As soon as, I had a job waiting for me as soon as I graduated because I did an internship my junior year. And I moved from Philadelphia to Missouri because I got a job at Hallmark Greeting Cards. And I made greeting cards. And while I was making greeting cards and drawing cakes and happy birthdays and flowers, at night, I created my own business where I talked about topics that I thought was important. I did science communication. I worked with cancer research facilities. I worked on a documentary about the Holocaust. I was doing the kind of work that I wish I was doing full time. And I opened a shop. And over the course of 4 years, so I graduated, and then 4 years, I continued to build this thing. And of course, everything's online, so that involves social media. I was making more money than I was outside of work than I was inside of work. I quit my job. I get a book deal, yada, yada, yada. And now I don't even do freelance. I only do my books.
That sounds good. So what is next for Rachel Ignotofsky?
That is a wonderful question. The next book, I'm working on it right now, and it comes out in March 2022. It is The History of the Computer. And it is a doozy, guys. It goes all the way back to prehistoric times. So I start with people being like, 1, 2, my fingers, how do they work? To literally yesterday. So we move through history, and of course, we talk about the people, inventions, and machines that have changed our world, and we focus on a topic of intent and impact. So what was the intent for the use of these machines? How did they impact humanity? And the exciting thing about this book is that it really goes into this idea of what is a tool? Well, a tool is like and if the computer is a tool to expand our minds and our mental ability, how does that change how we see the world? So just to give a quick example, a hammer is a tool to bang a nail, but it doesn't just do that. By having the tool of a hammer, we can then imagine how planks of wood combine in different ways, and in a way that we weren't thinking about before. So apply that to computers. Man, that's mind-boggling. So it's been an exciting book, and I'm really excited to share it with everyone. And of course, we mentioned both the Steves, all of the Allens, and of course, all of the women who have also contributed in the field of computer science.
Well, thank you. That sounds very exciting. That sounds really exciting. So I'm trying to think if I have any other questions. There were some questions about the women that you included. One question intrigued me, and it was, why did you include Hedy Lamarr?
Oh, I love Hedy Lamarr.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I think they wanted to know what criteria did you use to select, because there were so many, maybe there are so many, but when I was growing up, I knew about Madame Curie. And I never heard about Frida Kahlo, and I was a Spanish major. So never heard about her till after. So take it away.
Well, the criteria for this book was I wanted a range of history. So I started as, the reason it starts with Hypatia, because literally she was the earliest female scientist I could find with enough writing about her to write a biography, enough documentation and good sources that I could use. And so another criteria was different sort of fields of study. I wanted also a diversity of narratives. That means different economic backgrounds, different educational backgrounds. There's women who have, there's like Edith Clark. She has dyslexia, and she is the first female American engineer, electrical engineer. And then diversity of cultures and racial backgrounds, economic backgrounds. So that brings us to the question of why Hedy Lamarr? Well, Hedy Lamarr worked with her pianist to create Wi-Fi. And I really wanted to put her in because she is just an example of a woman who was only appreciated for her beauty at the time. You know, she wanted to help out with the war effort, and they told her to run a kissing booth, and they wouldn't even look at these documents that she patented that would eventually become which was then used in the Cold War to create, you know, secure systems for missiles, and then would become Wi-Fi. They wouldn't even look at her work during World War II. They just wanted her to give kisses. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I just really wanted to give an example of someone who was kind of an outsider, even in the science community, that wasn't taken seriously, but has had such a huge impact on technology. And Hedy Lamarr was a really great example of that. You know, because we have women who have gone through the highest levels of university with PhDs. We also have women like Mary Anning, who didn't even get a real education. It's not because they weren't intelligent. It was because they were discriminated against.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for this great informative session. I hope the students appreciated it. I know that they've studied, like I said, Katherine Johnson in grade 7, Rosalind Franklin in grade 8. They were talking about, and I read that one out loud, and I said, I hear an angry voice in this biography. She didn't get her the Nobel that she should have. So I know it was great having you here. Do you have anything that you wanted to add as a closing statement?
Just thank you guys so much for having me. You know, I think the biggest takeaway from my career and the work that I do is that if you wish that something existed in the world, just go make it. You guys have the skills, and you know, and also, like, whatever you love doing, please pursue it, because if you're passionate about it, and also if you can figure out how to turn your passion into something that can make the world a little bit better, then you know you're on to a really great idea. So whatever you're interested in, even if other people doubt you, just keep going and keep doing it. I guess that's the biggest thing to say.
That was great. That was great. I'm going to turn it over to Mike, I think, to conclude.
Sure. Just thank you. That was wonderful. We loved every second of it. Thanks for being a part of NEA Big Read and Women's History Month. And it was our pleasure to host you. All the best.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you. You too.